Welcome to the OCOM Podcast, Modern Medical Education, where we gather experts to discuss various topics in modern medical education, with the focus on today's show being taking the boards. I am your host, Dr. Robert Hasty. I'm the Dean and the Chief Academic Officer of OCOM, and I was joking around a little bit before that we have the Genius panel on today. I think I bring down the average IQ of the room, but we have three incredible guests with us today. The first being Dr. Mark Cody, our Associate Dean of Preclinical Education. Dr. Cody, welcome to the show. How are all things preclinical education here at OCOM?
All things preclinical education are amazing. I've been in this business so long that when I started, I had a full head of hair, and something's changed since. But I've seen some schools start. I've been involved with different curricula. I've been involved with different faculty, and I can tell you this is the best students, the best curriculum, and the best faculty I've been involved with. So all things preclinical are excellent.
Awesome, and it's so nice to have you here. And I wasn't joking around when I said I bring down the average IQ of the room. Speaking of which, we're also joined by Dr. Nina Zaveri, one of the other members of the Genius panel today, professor and one of the founding faculty members of OCOM. So welcome to the show, Dr. Zaveri.
Thank you, Dr. Hasty. Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks, and congrats on your recent, so many different wins recently. You got, full promotion up to professor not too long ago. They just featured, the students just did a big shout out for you, a hooray or whatever, based upon, what excellent teaching and stuff like that. And then the newspaper actually just, the Observer just made you faculty or community member of the week or influencer of the week. So congrats.
Thank you, Dr. Hasty, and thank you to my colleagues, because as Dr. Cody said, this is one of the best environments I've been in, supportive, collaborative, with faculty, staff, students, administrators. So I'm very glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, it's so nice to have you here, and all the expertise, right? You've been at several other medical schools, and to bring that wealth of experience, we're very fortunate.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then also returning to the show today, the highest-ranking physician in the Air National Guard, Florida, Colonel Dr. Darren McCauley, our founding chair of the Department of Osteopathic Manipulative Medicine, and a good friend of OCOM. So welcome, Dr. McCauley.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Everything in the OMM department is going phenomenal. We are very, very proud of the students, proud of what they've accomplished in a short period of time, and we look forward to seeing where they're going to go this coming semester and into next year.
Excellent. Good. And by the way, I still joke around, we have this A.T. Still cane, A.T. Still, the founder of the osteopathic profession, he started the first school in 1892, and at the end of his career, he always had a cane. And and actually, when he died, he actually had 8 canes. 7 of those are in the museum in Kirksville, Missouri. But we actually have the only one that's not in that museum in Kirksville, Missouri. So I swear we have like the best freaking luck ever since we've gotten that cane. So
definitely has good karma.
Yeah. So it's like our talisman of OCOM. So anyway, well, welcome to the show, Dr. McCauley. And today, it's one of the to me, I think, one of the fun aspects of medical education, and that's the boards. Anyways, we should probably define for the audience what the boards are, and sometimes people get confused between licensure exam and board certification and stuff like that. So anybody want to take the lead on what are the boards?
I guess I'll step in. The boards are required for an osteopathic or an allopathic student to pass before they're licensed to practice medicine. And they happen at different stages. Both allopathic and osteopathic schools require a step 1 and a step 2, or a level 1 and a level 2 exam. So there are 2 levels of boards that every medical student must pass in order to pass medical school. And the reason for that is once you get out of medical school, you have to apply for what's called a residency. Residencies are the most important part of your career. You can't practice medicine until you do a residency. You can't get a residency till you pass the boards. So the boards are set up essentially to protect the public, and it's an examination that's a minimal exam. So while in your entire time in medical school you learn a lot, you should learn a lot more than what are actually on the boards, so that the boards are testing a minimal competency. And so they have to be taken. There's 2 of them. One's usually taken at the end of second year, and the second one is usually taken at the end of third year. And you have to pass those to be able to get a residency and to practice medicine.
Great.
Can I add something to that?
Please
So
do.
when we talk about boards, since we are an osteopathic COM, what Dr. Cody is talking about specifically is COMLEX Level 1 and COMLEX Level 2. There is also USMLE Step 1 and USMLE Step 2. For our osteopathic students, we prepare them for COMLEX Level 1 and COMLEX Level 2. That's a requirement, right, to get your DO degree. But the way our curriculum is, from day one, year one, we, in our curriculum, in our case-based learning, in our OMM, we incorporate osteopathic principles and philosophy in what we do, in how we teach, in how we roll out the curriculum. So our focus is COMLEX Level 1 and 2. Our students may take or may not take USMLE Step 1 and 2, but when Dr. Hasty says, what does boards mean? It means COMLEX Level 1 and 2.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, level 3 is the one determines whether or not you can actually get the license, because you have to pass the first and the second to graduate medical school, and then you have to pass the third to actually get your license. And
Correct.
without the all 3 levels, you don't get a license. And I believe in all 50 states down in the United States. So it's licensure boards are important. Then of course there's board certification. So say for instance, I'm certified in internal medicine, which is a sort of a voluntary distinction afterwards, although a lot of insurance companies and a lot of jobs require board certification afterwards, which is different from the licensure boards, right? Right. So, yeah, I used to be a program director, and I would use level 1 of the boards as a screening tool to determine whether or not, I even interviewed folks for a residency program, although it's getting a little bit more complicated now, because now they've actually turned that into pass or fail like a few years ago. And then I know some of the residency program directors are looking more for level 2 of the board, so it's changing the strategy. So, how does that change, our approach here at OCOM in terms of looking at that?
I think it will change how students interact with the boards to a certain extent, because knowing that it's pass or fail, they'll feel more pressure to get out there and actually meet residency program directors, meet other folks in the profession or in individual hospitals as a way to make themselves stand out. Whereas I think in the past, students that did really well on the boards knew that they could, rely on those schools to kind of push them to the head of the pack. So that's a good and bad thing, because it gives students the opportunity to develop some of those interpersonal skills, but it also forces them to think about specialization a little bit earlier, because they don't have that leeway and that extra pad time.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it seems like this is like this old debate. Everybody wants to get past, some academic marker as an entrance for anything, right? So for medical schools for years, we've had, the MCATs, which, I don't know, I think they've been around 70, 80 years or something like that. And, that's such an important determination as a marker to getting folks into medical school frequently. And then there's, part of the folks saying, oh, we need to look past the MCAT and look more of a holistic review of the candidate, like you said, some of the interpersonal skills and stuff like that. And it seems like once you get into medical school, then all of a sudden the licensure examinations have kind of turned into that determinant for program directors to also use that as a academic surrogate when they're comparing from, medical students from across the country. That's the one common denominator is, how well they perform on the boards. But then, everybody wants to say, well, let's look at them more holistically getting into residency programs. So there's more of a pressure on that. But it just seems like it's this age-old debate, right?
Well, I mean, the whole purpose of the COMLEX exam is to provide some standardization, right? So that across curricula, students that went to one school actually received knowledge that they can use when you compare them to students from another school. Thinking about MCAT, that article that we read a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, that showed that MCAT scores actually are a very good predictor of medical school performance, right? So there's a reason why we use MCAT scores for admission. There's a reason why students study for the MCAT and try to develop their own study skills beforehand, because it does demonstrate that, hey, this is a pretty good indicator of how they're going to perform in medical school. But the other side of the performance in medical school, specifically once you make it out of the first 2 years and you start interacting with patients, are those interpersonal skills, right? Can you glean information from a patient? Can you work well in an interdisciplinary team? So those are also other factors that you're only going to be able to, as a program director or as an admissions officer or an interviewer, you're only going to be able to glean from actually talking to the person.
And another, if I may add, you're talking about MCAT being a standardized test. Well, complex level 1 and 2 were standardized tests, right? But now that it's pass-fail, I think there are many other components besides the interpersonal skills. For example, research. Research, all students now want to do research and put it on their CV and then do meaningful research, right? We are seeing that in our own program. We have research as a component. Students are responding very positively, right? They want to do research, but research involves critical thinking skills, original thinking, creativity. And so besides being physicians, they're learning to also be scientists and learn the scientific method, learn thinking like that, so that, as you said, the holistic review on their MSPE or their CV or whatever, when a program director sees that, now that provides a well-rounded candidate would have all those components in there.
And I like what you said about research. So I'll tell you, I've been in medical education for about 20 years now. The discussion that we have about, the desire to do research from medical students, as well as even applicants to medical school, to me, it's off the charts. It's the number one question I get asked on applicant day, because I meet with all the applicants when they first come in, and I give them, there's a Q&A time. I'd say the number one question they always ask is, what are we doing for research? And, of course, it's an easy one to answer because we've done really well. I mean, we have, even the first semester of our first class of medical school, we had 22 publications just from the students, which, I joke around with Dr. Ganti, our director of research. And, when I was a first semester student, by the end of the first semester, I was still trying to figure out where the bathrooms were, let alone getting published. So, but I think it speaks, a lot to, Dr. Ganti, but all the faculty that, mentor the students on the research and everything like that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so, well, I will tell you, we also have a distinction today, something I've never even, knew it was possible before. We have 2 people on the panel that was at a medical school that had 0 failures on the boards 3 years in a row, I believe it was. Yeah.
A year or 2 between the third one, but yes, 3 years of 100% pass rate on the boards, which had never been heard of. It was kind of interesting because when we did it the first time, the word, the ripple effect, so the colleagues across the country was, oh, that was a fluke. That was a big fluke. So we turned around and did it again the next year just to prove that it wasn't a fluke. And then a couple of years went by and we got 100% again. 100% is not something that's very normal, but our school was typically, out of a couple hundred students, we would have 2 failures, maybe 3.
Which is very low. Yeah.
Which is very, very low. So we were in the 99+% pass rate 14 of the 16 years that I was there.
Wow. Well, I know that you've taken, all your experience and knowledge, and you've done sort of a secret sauce for OCOM and getting our students ready for the boards. As much as you feel we can share, would you kind of walk us through some of that strategy for OCOM?
Yeah, sure. So first it starts with the curriculum. The curriculum is nationwide. If you look at the medical college research, nationwide, the curriculum's always the best predictor. When I was at the previous school, I also was interested in other predictors, so I developed a predictive model of 3 key indicators of how they were going to do. The curriculum, number one, but it was also closely followed by an in-house diagnostic examination that we created, and it was longitudinal data that we could use to compare against previous classes. And then closer to their exam time, we would use something that was available to other schools so we could compare how we did against other schools. And then we had one final exam just before they took the real exam. Very similar in this school. The curriculum should be number one. We have a spiral curriculum. We have an application-based curriculum, which is going to add to mastery of material versus memorization. The big difference in our school and other schools when it comes time for board preparation is we've kept main topics fresh for 2 years. The traditional medical school, you take a course in first semester, anatomy typically, biochemistry, things like that, or a block. And then there's a time lapse between your coursework and when you take the examination. And that's where students typically do something called board review. We are reviewing for the boards the entire time, and not for the boards actually, for medical knowledge and application. The boards will take care of themselves. We do have the diagnostic examinations. In their fourth semester, they will have 2 diagnostic examinations back-to-back, 8-hour process, which is the same as they mimics the COMLEX Level 1 examination. And then that's in January, and then they get to see how they did in subjects, so how they do in pharmacology, how they do in anatomy, how they do in physiology, and so they can identify weaknesses. Then they have time to improve those weaknesses by March when they get their second examination, and that one will be a store-bought, basically, examination. And then we can compare against how other students did across the nation at other osteopathic schools, how they did on that examination. So that's a nice comparison. And then at the end of right after they're finished with their coursework, they have to take a COMSE examination, which is an examination that's given by the NBOME, the same group that does the COMLEX USA examinations. And so it's a practice exam, but it's supposed to have some statistics on how the students will do on the real exam. And they are required to get a decent score on that exam before they're allowed to sit for the COMLEX examination. One of the things that I found over the years was when students take the exam earlier rather than later. And I think this is because if you spend a couple years in studying, you're study ready. You're in the mode. And if you take too much time away, you get out of the mode, and it's much harder to get back in and take an exam and do well. So we're going to require our students to take the exam in May, which is about a month and a half after their course ends. So that we think that all of those elements will lead to top board scores. On top of that, we have a course called Learning Consolidation here, which is, we call it a longitudinal course, but it actually goes for the first 2 years and into the third year, that prepares students for exams, board exams. How do they do it? We use a board examination product that they take actual board-style exam questions all 2 years. And they've already started. They begin day one with that course. It's designed for spirality. In other words, to bring topics back up over and over again, so they continue to keep that fresh on their mind. So that's some of our approaches to board success.
Excellent. I'll go ahead, Dr. Zaveri. Yeah.
So, and just to add to what Dr. Cody is saying, and just in terms of specifics, Dr. Cody is talking about almost 3 different types of board preparation strategies. The first one are diagnostic exams that he mentioned. Those are not purchased. Those were created in-house at another institution. We have updated it. We edit it routinely. So those are in-house created diagnostic exams. The second that he's talking about, there are many third-party resources and platforms. He's talking about that kind of an exam. And the third one that Dr. Cody talked about was COMSE, which is administered by or given by the NBOME. The NBOME, besides the COMSE, also has the COMAT series, the Foundational Basic Science series, and subject tests as well that institutions can use. And so we do have those 3 different kinds of exams. And then there is a fourth one, again, in-house created, called one-liners, which we strategically give the students. We supply that information in the first year, and then we assess or test that information in the second year. So all of these strategies with the different types of exams and the timing as to when they're given to the students allow us to, one, track, the students who are at risk, things like that, plus help the students who need the help, and then ensure that all students will succeed.
Excellent. I'll tell you, Dr. McCauley, yeah?
That series of exams reminds me of what we call diagnostic and therapeutic, right? When you're performing a procedure on someone, you want to get information out of the procedure, but you also are helping the patient at the same time. So the exams are set up so that students are able to find out their own weaknesses with enough time to double back and re-examine the curriculum, study on their own, but they also act as an indicator for us as faculty to figure out if there are areas where we need to bolster students as a group or as individuals in order to prepare them for success. And the spirality that Dr. Cody's talking about, where we continually readdress topics so that they don't get stale and students know that they can't just put something that they've learned down and forget about it. They're constantly going to be reminded of these topics, and they're constantly going to be brought back to the surface as an important part of our curriculum, especially in the OMM department, but throughout.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, to me, I think the whole science behind this is just so incredibly fascinating, especially when Dr. Cody was talking about, that 6 weeks between the time that the students finish courses and take the exam. And in some ways, this conversation is almost counterintuitive than what most people think. Because, I'll hear medical students when they go to medical school and they say, well, I want the maximum amount of time possible to study for the boards. But the evidence actually shows closer to the time they complete classes, they get better. And I am convinced that the neurochemistry of a medical student changes when they're, especially in the first 2 years in the preclinical, because they're having to think, it's almost like peak performance of an athlete, but with their brain, and they're just focused so much on learning. And I think that what happens is, it's like the whole thing, when your brain's not being used, it turns to mush type of thing. And I think that that's probably the reason why what we know is true, that you want to try to get as close to possible to the curriculum that they take their boards. But of course, on the flip side of the argument, there probably needs to be some study time that they can focus on bringing it all together, right? Of course, and students want that, right? They want, to be able to do that. So
as faculty, we're guiding their learning throughout the curriculum, and when they're studying on their own, there is a tendency to kind of lose focus, right? When you have all these textbooks and all these resources, it's very easy to spread your attention, go down different rabbit holes, trying to figure things out that you think may be on the boards or that you think may be a gap in your knowledge, whereas they're not actually being guided per se by the curricula and by the professors. So too much time to study on your own, you may be doing a lot of reading, but how much of that reading is actual useful material that you're going to be able to see again, and how much of it will you recall?
right.
Yeah, so to answer the age-old question, at the former institution I was at, I had that same question. So I did a study of 1,140 plus students. And I looked at all of the students, I looked at their board scores and when the timing of when they took it. And it turned out that 100% of them passed if they took it within 4 weeks after the end of their coursework. They started getting, if we had any failures or they got lower scores, they came later. So I presented that to the faculty. And they said, well, yeah, that's because the strongest students take it early, right? And then the weaker students wait till later. So of course it's. So I took the bottom 25% of the class and did the same study, and the same exact thing happened. The students that took it within 4 weeks, even in the lower quartile of the class, 100% of them passed in 4 weeks. It followed the same trajectory as the full class.
So, and to add to what Dr. Cody is saying, and you mentioned something about neurochemistry, and we've done this for a while in other institutions, which is why we have data to show that here we're not talking about, there's pedagogy, andragogy, and then there is heutagogy, and Dr. Cody pointed that out. So in andragogy, which is adult learning or the neurobiology of learning, you talk about self-directed learning, independent learning. In heutagogy, you talk about interdependent learning. And in our curriculum with this case-based learning, which is modeled around problem-based learning, that's where those components of interdependent learning, where the students work in groups. The learning is dependent on one another. And as a result, when it comes to finishing all your classes, they don't need beyond a 4 to 6 week dedicated board prep time. It allows them to be ready at that time. So, in fact, as what Dr. Cody is saying, the further removed you are from that interdependent learning, the more there is forgetting, the more there is the consolidation of the knowledge decreases. So, we have a lot of data which allows us to inform the board preparation strategy that we have in place. In other words, there's a reason for the madness, right? There's a method to the madness. And it can be very stressful for some students because when you are a student, you think, oh, now that I'm done with classes, I need 2 months to study and take the boards. Then I will feel prepared. Our data doesn't quite align with that thinking. And so, you can convince students, right? But the data shows that if you follow what the data shows you, you will have good success. And that's what we're hoping for.
It amazes me how many times in the world that the Goldilocks phenomenon is usually the right answer, right? Somewhere in between, right? It's not literally the day they finish class, and it's probably not 2 or 3 months later, but somewhere in between. And it sounds like you guys figured out somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. And then there's this classic thing of Parkinson's law. It was originally came from a 1950s economics article that, whatever resources you give to something, that's how much it takes. And so I'm convinced that, that's also probably true in so many things in life. So if you give students, 4 to 6 weeks to study for the boards, they probably do about as much studying in those 4 to 6 weeks than they would if they had that 2 or 3 months to study. Parkinson's law.
What gets worse over time with that amount of time, the 2 to 3 months, is their stress, though. I think that the stress just continues to rise, and you reach a point on that stress performance curve where after a while they're continuing to study, they're stressing themselves out, and their performance may suffer.
But I think it's also like a bucket with holes in it, right? So the water coming out, you have to put it back in at more back in that's coming out. And so what the students do, I believe, is they early on, they're pretty strong in some topics, then they're weak in others, and they don't study the ones they're strong in anymore, and they go after the weaker ones, which are typically smaller, represented on the boards. So they forget the bucket's leaking that main knowledge while they're going after the smaller knowledge.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, of course, we were talking about, the fact that really it starts from day one. And when Dr. McCauley was talking about the number of questions that we have, the students do, it reminds me of a fascinating conversation I had probably about a dozen years ago with the founder of TrueLearn, Dr. Courtney, which I know that Dr. Cody and Dr. Zaveri know well. But he showed his data that the more questions the students do, the better the outcome on the boards. And these are question banks of questions that are similar to the type of questions that students would find on the national boards. And, and I think it was like about a 12th percentile if you did at least 2,400 questions. And I think we have it hardwired into the curriculum. They have to do 3,000 questions. So it's a little bit like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to become an expert. It seems like 3,000 hours to be, do well on the boards or something with the questions, right? Yeah.
And they have to score. That's the learning consolidation course that's incorporated in there. And they have to score a certain percentage, a certain standard deviation below the mean. They have to score to pass the course. If they don't, they get to continue doing it, which only improves their chances.
And that also reminds me something else he had shared, because he actually had really great data in terms of like when the students were actually taking these questions and everything. And there's some, student that's like the procrastinator or whatever that will, do it the weekend before or whatever. But he actually shows that, the students that take the time to have a steady digest of questions where there's a reflection off the questions, everything, they have the much better outcome. And that's why I think, Dr. Cody, the approach that you're taking with the learning consolidation course, where they have that steady digest of questions over a 2-year period of time. Again, it goes back to, it starts at the beginning. And the fact that, the learning consolidation, and I love the fact that we don't call it a board review course, because it really is consolidating their learning. It's sort of that thing that I don't think we had ever figured out originally in medical education, where you would upload a whole bunch of information to the brain the first semester of medical school, and you wouldn't even think about some of that information again till the end of the second year when you have to like restudy for the boards. But we know from neurochemistry, for the adult learners, for that deep retrieval process, somehow if you have that revisit the curriculum information 3 to 6 months afterwards, where they have to kind of deep retrieve that information, then they never forget it again. And I think that's the brilliant thing with our learning consolidation course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One more major advantage in our curriculum is case-based learning. So twice a week, they go into a group of 8 students, and they actually apply what they've learned. And application-based learning is the top notch. So as they're applying it, and they do it over and over, twice a week, they do it for 2 hours, and they are developing collaborative skills. They have contextual type learning, and that adds to mastery of material versus memorization. I think that's another big advantage in getting them ready for boards.
So going back to what you just said regarding the Goldilocks phenomenon, it's interesting. You said Dr. Courtney designed his platform for certain success. Even age-old companies like Kaplan, their strategy or their numbers would tell you that for any learner to pass, say, USMLE or be ready for passing USMLE Step 1, when it was a scored exam, you have to take 2,500 questions and get them right the first time. Now, depending on your learner, they're all over the spectrum, right? Some good student may need to take 4,000 questions to hit that number. Another student might need 5,000. Another student might need 6,000, right? Where do these 6,000 questions come from? Today, there are several platforms that supply those board-style questions. So you're talking about the Goldilocks fit, where the learner then has to hit that target in order to be board ready, right? Our curriculum, that's what Dr. Cody is getting back to, is that from semester 1, when in learning consolidation, they're required to do those true learn questions. That's now it has, for this semester 2, the true learn questions have to now be at a certain average, right? They have to now hit a certain average, not just take the number of questions. So again, like I said, there is a method to how our curriculum is designed and how our strategies are designed based on data that we know from, all these past 2 decades at least.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
And I want to thank Dr. Zaveri for leaning forward and supplying faculty with the resources to be able to take the NBOME item writing course. Dr. Cody is constantly letting us know that our questions need to be board style. So the questions that you get in the curriculum itself, right, in the curriculum itself, are also board style questions. They're not a part of learning consolidation. They're not technically a board review, right? But we keep harping and going back to the fact that your primary board review is going to be a strong curriculum for the first 2 years.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that resonated with me, what Dr. Cody said was, he was talking about the strategy with application style learning. And, years ago, we've known this since the 1950s, right? There's something called Bloom's taxonomy that is sort of a pyramid with, sort of basic recall information at the bottom of the pyramid. And as you go up towards application, you get to the top of the pyramid. And the idea is that your learning is actually better when you're applying the information. So when you're diagnosing, treating, management, things that we do in each week with the students starting from week 1 of medical school, where they're actually going to the top of Bloom's taxonomy. And this was very different. Like when I went to medical school, the idea was that you sort of did a Karate Kid in learning, right? Mr. Miyagi, you had to learn the very basic definitions or memorize, certain structures or something in anatomy or whatever. And the idea was that only later on that you could actually start to apply that after you knew that. But I think what we've learned now in medical education is that the faster you can get to the top of Bloom's taxonomy, you actually have the long-term learning. So you're trying to apply from the very beginning. And so if you can have the medical student apply the information even from week 1 in medical school, their long-term learning as an adult learner is going to be superior. So And I have a feeling that's the reason why you all have had or at least part of the reason why you've had all, those perfect classes with, no board failures. So
I agree. And one other thing that bears mentioning with the curriculum that's often forgotten about is the board style questions. I mean, I've had this. I'm the second one that comes up and talks to the interviewees, Dr. Hastings. And my biggest question is, how do I know I'm going to do well on the boards? And the answer is simple. It's the curriculum and the thought process. The board, all the board exam, when Dr. McCauley talks about board style questions, they're clinical scenarios. And then they ask you in the first level basic science type questions, and the second level treatment type questions. And so you will get a question that may present a patient, a certain year-old patient comes to somewhere and they have some kind of complaint. And the taker of the examination is building a clinical picture in their mind. And then the question may ask, given an EKG, for example, they may say, well, what's going on at the PQ or STU waves type thing. And so the taker of the exam has built that clinical scenario, and then they're being asked basic science questions. That's exactly what we do in CBL every single day. So the students are looking at the cases, and they're answering these basic science questions as they go through. They're already in the mental realm of being able to answer those kinds of basic questions. And I think that's true at the previous institution, too. I think that's a big key to success also.
excellent. Yeah, I'll tell you, this is such a fascinating conversation. I could go on, all day. I'm sure there's probably people out there that, think that we're like kind of nerding out a little bit, but I love the stuff. I think it's awesome. Well, tell you what. Let me just do a final, question before we wrap up the show. And I guess this could be to any medical student that's out there, especially the OCOM students. When students are approaching the boards, what would be your best advice for the for the medical students? So I don't know. I guess I'll start with Dr. Zaveri down here.
What I would tell students is your board prep starts on day one, year one, semester one. So this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not cramming, dumping like you did in college. So you're preparing for a marathon. And when you do that, you train from day one, right? You train early. So my advice would be start early, stay on the training, stay on track.
Excellent. Great advice.
Don't think about board prep. Think about all the mechanisms of the case. So you have a case that has a clinical finding, critical thinking through clinical. Ask yourself all the whys, what's, where's, when's, and how's of the case, because that's what the boards are going to ask you. So, yes, it is board prep, but it's building your knowledge base and mastering material that's going to make you successful.
Yeah, excellent advice. Dr. McCauley?
My advice would be to continue to review material. Dr. Cody kind of hinted at this, but when you think you know something, you tend to put it to the back burner so that you can focus on things that you don't feel that you've mastered yet. But if you continue to review material, even things that you think you have mastery of, you'll pick up details and things that, oh, I didn't quite understand that as well as I thought I did, or, oh, this is a different way to look at it. So constantly making review of things that you've done in the past just as important as learning new material so that you have a fund in knowledge and that, like you said, so that, the water doesn't just continue to fall through the holes.
Yeah, well, brilliant advice. Again, this was our genius panel today with these three folks on here. Anyway, it was such a pleasure and honor to have all three of you on. So thank you very much for being on the podcast today and sharing your expertise on getting ready for the boards for our inaugural class of medical students and our future classes. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, this has been another episode of the OCOM Podcast, Modern Medical Education. Please join us again for the next episode where we learn more about the OCOM approach for modern medical education. Thank you for joining.